Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Let's talk about rich man versus poor man when the you-know-what hits the fan. Let's get to it. So me and Marshall, we just went for a 5K run. He's doing very, very good. He had that $5,000 implant put in a few months ago. He had to get it removed because there was this recurring infection that we would kill off with antibiotics, but the infection was in the implant or something like that, so it was going to keep returning. So they had to remove the implant. It cost us another $2,000. So this is damn near a $10,000 dog right here. And of course, he's going to be getting some pretty high quality training. But I'm actually glad that the implant was taken out, because now that means that we can go out winter camping and it's not going to bother him. But the implant definitely made sure that the bone was set basically back to its original form. So he's already running. He's not showing any signs that he's using it excessively. So don't worry, Marshall is doing good. He's making a comeback. Before we know it, we're going to be in the bush. My guess is a couple more weeks and he's going to be fully ready to go. Okay, rich man versus poor man. Poor people, there are two types of poor people. There's the hardworking poor person who is very frugal and is kind of a victim of their circumstance. And there's also poor, lazy people who bitch and complain. There's two types of rich people. There's people who are born with a silver spoon in their mouth and have just lucked out in terms of maintaining their wealth. And regardless of what people say, it's absolutely easier to make money if you have lots of it already. The more power you amass, the easier it is to acquire more power. It's a principle which is evident everywhere in nature. It's not something which is strictly limited to the capitalist system. So it's just a general tendency. The more money you have, the easier it is to make and hold on to that money. Now, there's also the rich people who were self-made. People who came from nothing and they built up a business, or they started a career in something and they were very frugal. They saved their money. They made the right investments. Two different types of people entirely. The person who is self-made, who is rich, absolutely has a better chance of surviving SHTF than the poor lazy person. Now, the rich man who is self-made versus the poor person who's a victim of their circumstance but is hardworking, that's more of a fair fight, because oftentimes those poor people have more general traditional skill sets, trades typically. And usually trade workers, they make a decent living. I mean, most trades workers, at least in Canada, they make middle-class wages. Whether you're a plumber or a welder or something like that, those guys make pretty good money. Mechanic. Now, I'd put the spoiled rich kid on par with the lazy poor person, because both are kind of entitled in a way. So one of the advantages of being poor, and one of the things that poor people tend to cling to and wear as a badge of honor, is your ability to get by with a minimal amount of stuff. And in most cases, I would agree with this. There's a certain amount of street smarts that you acquire by living in these poor neighborhoods and having to navigate those harsher environments. But that doesn't mean that just because people have money that they're not as versatile in one of those situations. I would say that half the people who are in positions of power and influence right now are there rightly so. And the other half are there due to cronyism or nepotism. They knew somebody, they inherited something from their family, or they're borrowing their family name, whatever the case might be. So yeah, there is going to be a reshuffling of the deck, but that doesn't mean that just because a person comes from wealth, especially if they're self-made, that poor people are going to have this huge advantage. Because people like that, I can tell you, wealthy people, I've known many, many wealthy people who work their ass off. They wear the same thing every day. They wear dirty clothes. They drive a dirty truck. You wouldn't know they're a millionaire ever. You would think they're probably bums. And so there's two different types of rich people. There's a really hard ass working person. Then there's the wealthy day trader who lives off his parents' inheritance and he knows nothing more than the stock market. Now, obviously, rich people are going to have an advantage because they have more resources. They have more stuff. One advantage that poor people have, if you can call it one, is that they have the numbers, whereas rich people are vastly outnumbered and in some cases might be singled out. in an SHTF situation. Remember Batman 3 where Bane galvanizes all the disgruntled lower class people to basically go and steal all the wealth back from the rich? And there's that scene where they're, you know, running through the streets, raiding rich people's houses, taking all the wealth back. Something like that may well happen. And I can only imagine that if you were in the billionaire class, that you absolutely would have that thought cross your head more than a few times a day, because you clearly knew that there was a huge amount of inequity and that you were on the positive end of that. And that if things came down to the wire, lots of people are going to be banging on your door. If you remember, I did that Dan Pena video where he's talking about what he's going to do when the crap hits the fan, and he says that it's going to happen. Now, he's pretty old, so chances are he may not see it happen, but he seemed pretty convinced that it was going to happen. He had that conviction that it is going to happen. The haves versus the have-nots is a battle that's coming, and I believe it. It's going to come in many different forms. I have a video coming out next month which is going to break that down, mankind's final conflict, and how technology is going to play a crucial factor in that, so definitely stay tuned for that. But the billionaire class knows that they're drastically outnumbered, and this is why they're buying land in these places with low population densities. This is why they're proposing a universal basic income, because they know things are getting down to the wire, and the only way they're going to able to preserve their advantage, or dare I say privilege, within society as earned by their financial status is if they concede a bit of that wealth, or at least a bit of their ability to generate more wealth. Because as I said, I can't remember what that principle is, but it's this idea that the bigger you get, the more exponentially faster you grow. So inevitably in any system, a person's power and influence reaches a critical mass to a point where they gain power and influence much faster than other people can. So you might go onto the stock market with your $10,000 and you're only making tiny bits of chump change, and other buddy goes on there with $1 billion, makes $1 million a day trading. And, you know, so that's the way the market works. Anyways, now most wealthy people are hardwired to function at a high level within a technologically advanced society. When technology ceases to exist, their lack of street smarts become more apparent. Their EQ, or emotional quotient, which is very similar to street smarts, with the exception of people who are in business or in sales, people who are adept at reading people in order to make a sale or make a deal. Most well-to-do people don't have to navigate the cutthroat environment of the streets like the average poor person does every day. You would be surprised at how good poor people are at reading people. I'm talking about street people now. They may not always have the highest IQs, and I'm just speaking in general terms. Obviously, you can have a person on the street who's a total genius, but maybe there's some mental health barrier that's preventing them from translating that into material success. But generally speaking, in order to survive from day to day in a situation which more so resembles the natural world, the natural order, the dog-eat-dog world of things, you have to know how to read people. And that is one major advantage that poor people are going to have in a shit hits the fan situation. I think it was Max Kaiser who first said the phrase, if people have nothing to lose, they lose it. And if you have nothing to lose, you're probably more likely to take risks, to do certain things. Now, obviously, you run the risk of receiving the consequences and being on the other end of a rifle bore. But it should not be underestimated that a lot of people who live on the street, or who just live in poverty, or just are poor people in general, are more likely to take risks, more likely to engage in risky behavior, which is not always calculated, but nonetheless their behavior is more unpredictable, and they are essentially wild cards. They also may be more networked. A lot of wealthy people don't really have a lot of networks. A lot of wealthy people are fairly isolationist. You know, they're fairly competitive-minded people, so they don't put themselves into large communities. They obviously don't join gangs. So poor people may be quicker to unify in a grid-down situation, and they're probably just psychometrically more communistic by nature, in the sense that they're more communally oriented. They're less independently minded. They're more focused on the group as opposed to the individual. So there's that go right back to that safety in numbers thing. A lot of poor people don't care about power. And of course, there's going to be a less of a downgrade in standard of living with poor people who are basically always trying to survive. They're never in a mode where they're trying to thrive or they're trying to prosper. Whereas people who are trying to thrive and prosper, when thrust into a survival situation, that may come as more of a shock. So you can see, for these reasons, among probably many others, poor people, it would appear, would be better suited. They have the qualities which would better suit them to a grid down world. Insofar as their personalities are concerned, that's not to say that they are as prepared. So let's say you're a person who's hardworking, you're held back by some unfortunate life circumstances. Maybe you have a sick family member, or you're a single parent, you have 3 kids. You have these things holding you back from improving yourself in such a way that's going to allow you to gain more economic status and power. Then your strength and resourcefulness is going to come through in any tough situation. So long as you have the right skills, so long as you have the motivation and the grit and the courage, then you're going to be able to stand up to the person who has all of the super preps, who has millions of dollars worth of preparedness supplies. But at the same time, I also see people who are naively jealous of people who have spent a long time building up their preps. And they tell themselves these things like, oh, you don't need this or that to survive. It's too expensive. And it's done as kind of a defense mechanism. So I guess they don't have to feel like they're at a disadvantage in one of those situations. And let me make something clear. You don't need all the fancy stuff. You don't need it, but it's absolutely helpful. I mean, if you have a good knife that you're familiar with and that you use all the time, it's better than having a bad knife that you're familiar with and that you use all the time. Familiarity is a big factor. If you have a big, nice plot of land that you're used to farming, and you have all the toys and all the trimmings, and you have all of the expensive fancy firearms that you're familiar with, because remember, fear the man with one gun because he knows how to use it. But if you're familiar with that stuff, then yeah, of course you have an advantage. If you have superior technology, we know what happens when a society that has superior technology meets one that has inferior technology. It usually doesn't work out for the ones with inferior technology. But if you're a poor, lazy person who just expects the world to give them something, and you spend your better part of your days smoking dope and playing video games and trolling my videos, then you're probably not going to survive. Because if you don't have what it takes to get ahead, well, everything is good like it is now, then like hell you're going to be able to thrive in an adverse environment where there is no electricity and there is no food. You got to go and find your food or grow your food, and you have to defend yourself and all these things. I mean, if you can't make it now, man, when you have none of those threats, I can only wonder what sort of delusional fantasy land you're living in that you think you're going to somehow thrive in that environment. Now, I realize that there's certain people who have, like I said, have disabilities. They have sick family members. They have the single parent household and some other things that are holding them back. But I would venture to say that nowadays, opportunity is everywhere if you look for it. I mean, even just YouTube itself. You can make a YouTube channel right now. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a single mom, you could make the single mom YouTube channel and tips for single moms, and people would watch. So there's always opportunity in the day and age of social media. You just have to find it. And everybody nowadays wants to hear genuine stories. That's why nobody watches TV anymore, because people don't like the fake ass shit. People want to watch real people struggling with real things. So there really is no excuse anymore. You could be a disabled person. You could make a channel called the Disabled Channel and just speak to disabled people and how you live your life, the struggles, how you overcome them. So I would not underestimate wealthy people, even if they don't have all of the skill sets, because they're going to be very resourceful. And that's another thing. I've said this before, that the grid is what accommodates millionaires and billionaires. Without the grid, without money, you can't have millionaires and billionaires. The more sophisticated society becomes, the more it allows for greater wealth discrepancies. So when we go back to the big reset, the capacity for wealth discrepancy isn't going to be as big. I mean, even in feudal times, the king was only so much richer than a peasant because technology limited their capability. They weren't nearly as far removed as, say, I am from like Bill Gates or something like that. Bill Gates is thousands and millions of times more wealthy than I am, but a king to his peasant might have only been several hundred times wealthier than that peasant in terms of the lifestyle that they lived. 8 years ago, I wasn't a prepper. I had no preps to my name. Throughout my 30s, I've become a prepper. So you can't look at me, if this is day one for you, and want to be me. And I'm not saying I'm, something you should aspire to be, or I'm this super prepper. I got a lot left to learn. I got a long, long way left to go, okay, before I would even consider myself an expert at any of this stuff. But you don't want to be comparing yourself. It's like you're going into kindergarten and you're comparing your level of knowledge to that of a professor, or your acquisitions to that of a professor. It's just stupid. So it's okay to start off with, the cheap $20 knife and the $100 Bugout bag. That's where you have to start. And then you go and you slowly develop and you learn new things. You learn what's good and what isn't good. And you develop these little skills along the way. You develop the lingo, all the rest, and you get familiar with stuff. And eventually you're going to be where I am. That's the thing. A lot of people who criticize me in the comment section when I show some of the bigger toys, they're the ones that someday are going to have those toys. You are going to have those things someday. I guarantee you, if you continue on this trajectory of being a prepper, you eventually are probably going to have more than me. I mean, most of you probably are more resourceful than me. I mean, if you own a new car and there are two cars in the two-car garage and you live in a middle-class neighborhood, then you're probably doing just as good, if not better, than I am. So there really is no reason for you to come onto the videos and criticize me for buying a $2,500 freeze drying machine. That's just asinine, especially the things that people spend money on nowadays. I'm gonna be making a video about that because there's such a huge double standard when it comes to, oh, what do you mean you spent $100 on that knife? But it's okay to go and drop $200 on front row tickets to the LA Lakers or whatever. It's even more than that. It's like $500 for some of these tickets. I mean, only the super wealthy celebrities can attend these games nowadays. Anyways, there's a lot of dumb things that you can spend your money on. And if it floats your boat, fine, that's your right to do so. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out. The best way to support this YouTube channel is to support yourself by gearing up through CanadianPreparedness.com or BugoutRoll.ca. Premium quality gear at the best possible price using the incredibly secure and easy to use Shopify platform. We offer free shipping to the United States for orders over $200 USD and free shipping to Canada over $75. So support the channel by supporting yourself.